So, interesting article in the Wall Street Journal this week. Apparently, the United States is concerned that Russia is going to escalate tensions in Syria. And, there could be a flashpoint for conflict between the two countries because, oh yeah, the U.S. is occupying Syria. And Russia, who's actually allied with the Syrian government, is not too happy about that. And, in fact, would support the Syrian government in trying to thwart the ongoing American invasion of their country. And that, of course, would be a provocation on Russia's part. Or at least, that's kind of the implication. Because I could only read a couple paragraphs of the article before it was locked behind a paywall. Unfortunately, the Wall Street Journal doesn't want me reading the rest of the article, but reading that much did remind me of the American occupation in Syria. And it occurred to me, you know what, I haven't even thought about it, let alone talked about it, since Russia's invaded Ukraine, and Russia has been sanctioned by all of these Western countries because it's so beyond the pale that Russia would violate the territorial sovereignty of another nation who they disagree with. And it made me think to myself, you know what? I don't believe that the United States has been sanctioned by anybody, even Russia, for occupying 1/3 of Syria. That's more than Russia is occupying of Ukraine. The estimates I've seen is that Russia's occupying currently about 1/4 of Ukraine. But the U.S. has occupied 1/3 of Syria for years now. And nobody seems to have a problem with it. That's just, it's okay. It's okay when we do it. But it is satanic when Vladimir Putin does it. I guess we're occupying Syria in the name of democracy, and Putin is occupying Ukraine in the name of autocracy, right? So there we go. It really is that simplistic in the minds of Western liberals. That's how they think. And they'll even use terms like own and occupy. They admit what they're doing. They even admit that, and as Trump did himself, that we're in Syria to take the oil. We're only occupying the part of Syria that has oil so that we can keep oil away from the Syrian people and bring in our American contractors to extract it and sell it. They're not, so there's not even a good veneer. There's not even a good lie to justify our occupation of Syria. The Ruskies, at least, what they're saying is, well, we're trying to help the political dissidents in eastern Ukraine who are persecuted by the post-Maidan government, which, hey, there's a pretty good case there. Ever since Maidan, the Kiev government is very anti-Russian minority. And so you can disagree with, whether or not the tactics that Putin's using are the right way of trying to deal with that problem, whether this could have been solved, diplomatically or something like that. You can argue about that. But, or you can argue whether that's his motivation at all. You can just say, well, Putin really, he says that's his goal, but his real goal is just that he wants to conquer Ukraine. You can argue that too. But in the case of America in Syria, America's totally out in the open and says, hey, we're in Syria to take the oil. That's what we're doing there. And if the Ruskies lift a finger to help Assad push us out, well, that's a provocation. If Russia does anything to assist the people of Syria in retaking their own oil fields from Americans, that's a provocation against America. That will be World War III. But us, giving all these weapons to Ukraine, including apparently anti-ship missiles, which were used to blow up a Russian tugboat, according to the Ukrainian government, that's just good old democracy there. There's no provocation there. And what's so sad is that a lot of the Western public who just, watches normal news, even people who are perhaps a little somewhat red-pilled on other issues, on domestic issues, people who are not woke, as we say here in America, they will be fooled by this crap. But you know who isn't fooled by any of this? The masses of people around the world who aren't brainwashed by Western media. If you live in South America, in Africa, in India, in Pakistan, in China, perhaps even Japan, although Japan's media is pretty pro-Western, it's pretty easy to see how you can look at the outrage over Ukraine and yawn because of how hypocritical it is. You don't have to go all the way back to Iraq. Yeah, Western liberals were poo-pooing the idea because I guess a lot of anti-war people, when Russia, invaded this, people were talking about Iraq and saying, hey, what America did in Iraq was bad too, and all of you people supported that. And all the libs were going, oh, well, Iraq was then, this is now. Why do you all keep talking about Iraq? Putin's not invading Iraq right now. He's invading Ukraine. That's the real issue. And they're going, we live in, today, in the present. And they were proud of this. But it's like, you don't even have to go back to Iraq. Look at Syria right now. The U.S. is occupying and extracting resources from 1/3 of Syria. A bigger chunk of Syria than Russia is occupying of Ukraine. Yet nobody's sanctioning us. It seems to me like they're just doing it. They're, refraining from sanctioning us, the Americans, because they understand that it's in their best interest to still do business with America, even if they disagree with things that America's doing. But America, our regime, feels so secure and safe in its position. It is so self-assured and so stable that it thinks that it can do things which will wreck the living standards of the American people and the other peoples of the West in the name of, advancing their own political narrative. And that, hey, that's just fine. They'll suffer no consequences. And so I want to take the opportunity today to call for placing unilateral sanctions against maximum pressure sanctions against the United States. I think that we should embargo all of America's oil and all of their food, and don't let them have any building materials or any energy or nothing. Don't let them import any energy. If you sell energy to America, you're going to be sanctioned too. And you know what? From the standpoint of China and Russia, that wouldn't even seem as dumb as what America's doing. As dumb as it would be for Russia and China to sanction America and all of the Western countries who, of course, are just, affiliated with America. They are, their foreign policy is pretty much controlled by Washington. As dumb as that would be for them to sanction us, it's a lot dumber still that we sanction them. Because no matter how much oil we are stealing from Syria, I guarantee you it doesn't make up for all the oil that we are trying to seal off inside of Russia and that we are refusing to buy from Russia. You know how expensive it is to occupy a country? The real cost of each of those barrels of oil that is being, to the American taxpayer that's being pulled out of Syria, it's astronomical. I just can't get over what a stupid country we live in. It'd be one thing, to have people in power that I respected, but who I vehemently disagreed with and who I thought, were even evil. Like Harry Truman. He did things that I consider to be vile. I think that dropping the nuclear bombs on Japan, and I know a lot of my fellow Americans will, vehemently disagree with it. I think that is unforgivable. But I have far more respect for somebody like Harry Truman, who when he finished his term as president, he got in his car with his wife and he drove home to Kansas himself. You don't have that anymore. You know the last time that Hillary Clinton drove a car? In fact, I know the exact car that it was. It was, back in '92 when they got elected. When Bill got elected, I say they. Their car that both of them shared was I don't know the exact year, but it was a late 80s Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra. One of those front-wheel drive, 4-cylinder crappy cars. Actually, it might have had a 350 in it. I think they put V8s in some of those in the nicer ones. I'm sure the governor of Arkansas had a decent one. But just not what I consider an impressive car. I mean, they were perfectly reliable from what I understand, and they had good cars. They were just ugly, little compact unibody things. But that was, well over, 35 to 40 years ago. 35 years ago, thereabouts. I guess 30 that they got elected. There's nothing admirable about people like that. And there's nothing impressive, about their intellect. There's no deeper strategy to what they're doing. They're idiots. They don't apply any sort of logic to their decision making. They've been rolling snake eyes, essentially, every year for probably 40 years at this point. Making the worst decisions possible. Always losing every bet they make. And the United States was so powerful at the time, at its peak, and had so much goodwill built up all over the world, that they've been able to make terrible moves for decades now. And we're still around. We haven't blown up completely yet. We haven't completely imploded. Somehow there are still some ordinary people around the world who have a positive view of America. And I don't mean to imply that they should have a positive view of Russia and China. On the contrary, I dislike Russia and China for many of the same reasons as other people in the West, although I think probably on the Russia stuff, people in the West, the media has whipped them into such a ridiculous frenzy that I probably can't relate to the problems that people have with Russia. And no, my problem with neither of them is the fact that they're undemocratic or that they persecute their political opponents, because that never happens in the West. I just want this nightmare to end. I want the unimpressive, terrible people who have been in power in this country for longer than I've been alive. I just want them gone. And I want the whole structure gone. And you know what? Let's start over with a bunch of little mini Americas. I think that we could use the Soviet Union treatment. Soviet Union breaks up, all the republics, get to run their own country. Some of them did well, some of them did less well. Some of them had smart leadership, some of them had stupid leadership, but they were better off than they were, I still maintain, than under, the single Soviet flag. Because there was room for experimentation. They got to be different. Different countries got to try what worked better or worse. And that's the way we need to be here in America. That's the only way that we're going to become strong again, because the centralized government in this country is beyond incompetent. Incompetent doesn't begin to describe what we've witnessed. These people are pathological failures. These people who preach about values, they're beyond hypocritical. They are hypocritical implies that it's a flaw, but for them, or a bug in their design. But it's really a feature. The fact that they have no consistent moral beliefs. Their only value is that they hate Russia primarily and hate China secondarily. And of course, their other value is that they love themselves. So everything they do is wonderful. Everything China and Russia does is terrible. It's evil. I don't know. I try and think, how do you talk to a normie about this stuff? Because it's not difficult. It's not that there's a lot of, required reading. It's a pretty damn basic issue. The next time you see somebody with a Ukrainian flag bumper sticker, or if your neighbor, wants to put a Ukrainian flag on their garage, maybe you put a Syrian flag up just to troll them. But actually, these people are so ignorant, they probably wouldn't even get it. They wouldn't know what the flag is. They might ask you, hey, what's that flag? And if you do, you could say, hey, that's my flag of Syria. I'm showing support for them because currently 1/3 of their country is under occupation by our army, which is something that we actually have control over. And so me expressing, my discontent and my showing support for Syria actually is sort of a brave act. Unlike, putting the Ukraine flag up, like, who's going to care? Who's going to be mad at you for putting up a Ukrainian flag in your garage, or putting a Stand With Ukraine bumper sticker, or I'm sorry, hashtag Stand With Ukraine bumper sticker on your car. Nobody's going to disagree with you. But if you put a Stand With Syria bumper sticker, and you put a Syrian flag, up, if somebody knows what that is, it's going to turn some heads. They're going to be upset with you. They're going to say, hey, why aren't you standing with our military? And you know what? That's actually something that could affect change, because if enough people did that, and it became popular to get our troops out of Syria, it could actually happen. No matter how many people put Stand With Ukraine bumper stickers on their car in the United States, that's not going to motivate the Russian army to leave. So it's futile. It's virtue signaling. That's it. All these people who, want to put up posters of Zelensky in their house, who think that, oh, he's this wonderful wartime leader. If you tried to create the same personality cult around Assad, which, there was kind of like a meme, there was sort of a meme cult of personality around Assad, like right at the start of the Syrian civil war, just because like 4chan counterculture type stuff. But these Zelensky supporters, they're serious. They really do think that he is, some wonderful, political statesman, wartime leader, an Eastern European Churchill. So I just can't get over how stupid this all is. You know what? Maybe I should call my congressman and tell him, hey, you know what? Why don't we stop occupying 1/3 of Syria? Maybe even just for optics. Don't you think, optics-wise, looks bad to be occupying 1/3 of Syria when we're crying about Russia occupying 1/3 of Ukraine? And then if he comes back at you, oh, well, we're trying to support the democratic Syrian rebels against the terrible autocratic regime in Damascus. That's exactly what Russia is saying about what they're doing in Ukraine. They're saying they're supporting the democratic rebels against the terrible autocratic regime in Kiev. So stop it. Pick one. Either it's wrong or it's not. And you know what? Not that your congressman will answer the phone, but you know what? Maybe if some people started actually phoning that in, it makes a difference. It actually does make a difference when you call your congressman. I've heard this from many, many people who have worked in politics, because comparatively, not a lot of people actually call their congressman. And sure, you might be the only person to actually call your congressman about this issue. But it's better than nothing. It's worth a try, right? And so I think I'll do that, because most of the time I'm not someone who ever does that sort of thing, because I don't really feel that much of like it'll ever make a difference. But in this case, it's just, and I also don't feel like the people who answer the phone there really have much logic to go on. I feel like you're just sort of talking to a wall. But in this case, I think this is an honest question that I should have as a voter. Why are we so upset with what Russia's doing when they're doing the exact same thing that we're up to in Syria? Short of the whole stealing the oil part, because I don't believe Eastern Ukraine has any oil that the Russians are stealing. Not that the Russians need to steal oil. The Russians are flush with oil. They're a very lucky society. They get to have cheap gas prices and diesel. And you know what? They probably even are allowed to have real diesel engines that aren't bogged down with all of this terrible emissions crap that makes them get 10 miles per gallon. So their fuel is cheaper. Their vehicles are more fuel efficient because they're not bogged down with emissions crap. Their electricity is probably pretty cheap. Their house is probably pretty cheap. Their mortgage rates about the same as they are here. Putin came out and said he's going to try and, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't agree with this as a government policy standpoint, but he's just saying, hey, for prime borrowers, we're going to, subsidize the interest rate down to 7% for a mortgage. Well, that's about what a 30-year mortgage conventional is going to run you here in the United States. So, with all that said, call your congressman. Make the comparison between Ukraine and Syria. Point out, and do your homework. Make sure you understand the situation. Understand, U.S. is backing rebels in Syria, blah, blah, blah. So we're occupying 1/3 of it. Russia, backing rebels in Ukraine. So they're occupying currently about 1/4 of it. Ask your congressman how he's not a hypocrite. That's simple. So, see you folks back here tomorrow.